Today I will be presenting on two question particles. One is ki and other one is naki in the Indo-Aryan language Bangla, and how it occurs both in a polar question construction and also in alternative question constructions. So this is the roadmap of today's talk. First, I'm going to give a very brief introduction on polar question formations in the language Bangla. Then we'll try to move to the syntactic positions of the polar question particle in the language and how does it correspond to these semantic effects. Third, we will try to see that how does the polar question particle ki and the polar question particle naki, they can occur both in yes no question as well as an interrogative disjunction marker. And then we'll try to discuss some differences between these two particles, the ki and naki. And probably at the end, we will have a discussion over a problem regarding another polar question particle, which is skina, and it has also been very well worked in the literature. So here we go. In Bangla, polar questions or yes-no questions can be formed in two ways. So number one, we can see that we have a declarative clause, and at the end of the declarative clause, if we have a rising tone, it gives an yes-no interpretation. Ram cha khache, is Ram having tea? We can also have a polar question particle marker ki besides the prosody that we can notice in two. Ram ki cha khache, is Ram having tea? And Bangla is not the only Indo-Aryan language which actually forms yes-no questions by using these two methods. We also have Hindi and Assamese, and they have also been quite well argued in the literature. So the position that ki holds in a question form is like a multiple position, okay? But it cannot occur clause initially, as it requires some element to be criticized to its left. Like we can just say very well, Ram ki cha khache, Ram cha ki khache, Ram cha khache ki. Will Ram have tea? But we cannot say ki Ram cha khache. That will be absolutely out. If you have a polar question with a key marker, then wherever the key sits in the question, the meaning of the polar question will also get changed depending on the position of key. For example, if we take the context in 4, which says that, you know, Ram is having tea in something, and A wants to know the kind of crockery in which Ram is having tea. So in this situation, A would question by positing the polar question particle ki right before the indirect object, like Ram ki kape cha khache, is Ram having tea in a cup, instead of putting ki in the other positions where it would be acceptable in some other situation, but definitely not in this. Now, this similar kind of behavior of Hindi polar kya has already been noticed by Biesma and et al. 2018, where they propose that kya acts as a focus sensitive operator, and it questions the elements which occur immediately to its right and nothing to its left. But later they also, they have shown that the elements to the left of the PQP can also be questioned if it bears a phonetic stress. So same thing can happen in Bangla. Our claim that the PQP key questions only the element to its right, it gets more evidential if we have a key in a pre-verbal position. Like for example in 5.1, Ram kape cha ki khache, like is Ram having tea in a cup or not? That is the intended meaning, okay? So with this kind of question where key sits right before the verb, the only possible answers are either yes or no. These are the only alternatives that are present in the discourse, and we simply cannot have any other unstated alternatives like no, he's having coffee. That will be absolutely infelicitous in this situation. Right. What we can notice that this PQP key, it also occurs in alternative questions. Let's notice data 7. In data 7, we have two declarative clauses which are disjoined by a Boolean disjunction marker ba. Ram gaan shekhe ba naach shekhe. Ram learns singing or dancing. Now, if we replace ba by ki, then automatically it gives an interpretation of alternative question, like Ram gaan shekhe ki naach shekhe. Does Ram learn singing or dancing? This ki can also occur in other alternative questions, like in polar alternatives. For example, number 9, Ram cha khabe ki na? Will Ram have tea or not? It can also occur in constructions like or something else, which will be our second disjunction. So Ram cha khabe ki onno kichu khabe? Will Ram have tea or something else? Based on the empirical evidence that I have just provided right now, maybe we can assume that there is an identity relation between the polar question particle key and the interrogative disjunction marker key. And the link between the PQP key and disjunction morphem has already got its first mention in CIIL in 2008. So he shows in languages like Malayalam, Sinhala, and Japanese that the disjunction morphem, it actually surfaces as a question particle. And Amritavalli also points out the same in the language Kannada. Jayashilan's argument was that, like, every question, okay, whether it's a WH question or a polar question or an alternative question, every question has a disjunction operator. And the question particle is the lexical realization of that operator. So, for example, if we have a question like, who came to the party? And the possible answers of that question would be, John came to the party, or Tom, or Susan, or Mary, and it can just go on. So basically, there is a disjunction in the answer space of questions. And based on this understanding, Jayashilan proposes a three-way identification, which is like the disjunction operator, which is also the question operator, and which gets realized as the question particle, as we can see in number 11. Naki is another question particle in Bangla, which occurs both in polar question as well as in alternative question as the disjunction marker. So, for example, 12, Ram cha khabe, naki coffee khabe? Will Ram have tea or coffee? And we can see naki occurring at the end of the sentence construction that we have in 13, like Ram cha khabe naki? Will Ram have tea? But very interestingly here, the naki has an evidential reading, like inferential evidential reading. This has already been argued by Diti Bhadra in her dissertation to 2017. But what we can notice here in this presentation, that this evidential naki can also occur as plus Q disjunction morphem. So far we have noticed that we have two plus Q disjunction morphemes, and let's try to understand the difference between them. For that, I will try to walk you through the discourse in 14. So in 14, the speaker A asks the addressee B, Tumi cha khabe naki coffee khabe? Will you have tea or coffee? And B doesn't seem to respond it directly. In fact, B tries to dodge the question and keeps on saying something else. So maybe B says, coffee স্বাদ খুব কড়া আবার চিনি ছাড়া চাও করা হয়. So like coffee tastes strong, however tea without sugar also tastes strong. And A, out of frustration, just want to force out the answer from B. So in that situation, A is never going to repeat the question by positing naki as a disjunction marker. In that situation, A is going to place the disjunction marker ki. Tumi cha khabe ki coffee khabe? So will you have tea or coffee? Where the speaker is forcing the addressee to choose one of the alternatives, and simply the speaker and the addressee cannot address with some other response here. And this is called a cornering effect of the particle key. I'm sorry, I did not mention here. Cornering effect, this term has already been given by Biesma 2009 and Biesma and Rollins in 2012. There are other differences between ki and naki. Like, for example, ki cannot disjoin noun phrases, like 15. Ram cha ki coffee khabe. Will Ram have tea or coffee? That is absolutely out in Bangla. But naki can disjoin the noun phrases, like Ram cha naki coffee khabe. Will Ram have tea or coffee? Good. Another difference is that ki cannot disjoin non-finite clauses, but naki can. For example, 17, Ma Ram ke cha khete ki coffee khete bollo. Like, did mother ask Ram to have tea or coffee? Absolutely out. And 18, where naki can disjoin, Ma Ram ke cha khete naki coffee khete bollo. Did mother ask Ram to have tea or coffee is good. That's fine. There is another particle which is called another question particle. It is kina, and Diti Bhadra, in her dissertation 2017, she actually argues that kina is the embedded question particle, which behaves exactly like English weather, and it also seems to be an interrogative disjunction morphem in alternative questions. So, if you just try to notice the examples in 19, 20, and 21, she proposes that in all these three examples, kina surfaces in different ways. For example, in 19, Ma jante chaye Ram cha kheche kina. So, mother wants to know whether Ram had tea. In 20, Ma jante chaye Ram cha kheche ki na. Mother wants to know whether or not Ram had tea. And 21, Ma jante chaye Ram ki cha kheche na coffee kheche. So mother wants to know whether Ram had tea or coffee. According to her, 19 and 20, like based on Larson and Cartoonen's analysis of weather questions, she actually proposes that 19 and 20, they have identical meaning. The only difference is that in 19 we have implicit or not. The or not doesn't occur phonologically. But in 20, the or not surfaces. That is the only difference. Otherwise, 19 and 20 both are embedded polar questions. But 21 is an embedded alternative question where she argues that ki has moved from its base position to the subject to position, like after the subject, to mark the scope for disjunction. Now, in this case, I think we have some problem. Okay, I'll just discuss the problem here. Whenever we have ki and na as separated with a pause in between, I assume that it has a cornering effect interpretation. It has an alternative question interpretation. It cannot have an embedded polar question interpretation based on the responses that it will demand. For example, in 19a, if we just say the sentence that Ma jante chaye Ram cha kheche kina, mother wants to know whether Ram had tea, where ki and na are concatenated together. Now, B might respond by saying, yes, he had tea, ha kheche, choosing the given alternative. Or B might just say no and can choose some other alternative which is unstated, but it is there in the discourse. It is just salient in the discourse. Na o coffee kheche. Now, A can continue by saying, I don't want to know whether he had tea. What I want to know whether he had tea or not. Sorry, whether he, I don't want to know whether he had coffee. What I want to know whether he had tea or not. So, Ram coffee খেয়েছে কিনা সেটা জানতে চাইনি. জানতে চেয়েছি ও চা খেয়েছে কি না. In this case, the addressee B can simply answer only by either saying yes or by saying no. The addressee B is forced to choose between these two alternatives. The addressee B cannot say here, na o coffee kheche. That will be absolutely infelicitous in this occurrence. So based on this, I have this assumption that 20 where ki and na are separated and 19 where ki na they are concatenated together, they have the identical meaning, which I don't think so, because 19 has a embedded polar reading, and 20 has an alternative reading or a polar alternative reading. Another problem that we can have from this is that Bhadra claims that in the embedded alternative structure, key has moved from its base position to mark the scope for disjunction. So basically in 23, what she says that Ma jante chahe Ram ki cha kheche na coffee kheche. So she claims that in the structure of ki na coffee kheche, key has moved to the subject to position so that we can have the alternative disjunction. If that is the case, then how do we account for data like 24 and 25? In 24, we have more than 2 disjunctions. Okay, so like mother wants to know whether Ram had tea or coffee or juice. So Ma jante chahe Ram ki cha kheche, na coffee kheche, na juice kheche. In this case, how are we going to say where the key has moved from? Has the key moved from the kina of coffee, or has the key has moved from the kina of juice? Another evidence that we can have based on this, number 25, where key and naki can occur, like they can co-occur in an alternative question structure. Like Ma jante chahe Ram ki cha kheche naki. Naki, as I just mentioned earlier, as an polar question particle as well as alternative question marker. Naki coffee kheche. Mother wants to know whether Ram had tea or coffee. So based on this evidence, I have this claim, maybe it's too early to make this claim, that the key that we have in the subject to position, that is the polar question particle which was originated there. It has not moved from the kina position. And also I have another argument, maybe the na that we see here in 26, the cha kheche na coffee kheche, tea or coffee, this na is the contracted form of the morpheme naki. And why am I making this claim? Because they seem to have, display similar behavior. Exactly like naki, na can also disjoin noun phrases. Like 27, Ram cha na coffee khabe. Will Ram have tea or coffee? Like naki, na can also disjoin non-finite clauses. Ma Ram ke cha khete na coffee khete bollo. Did mother ask Ram to have tea or coffee? Like 28. Another thing that I forgot to mention here, that is exactly like naki, na also cannot have a cornering effect in a situation that we had seen earlier, where ki is the only disjunction morpheme that can have a cornering effect. So I will conclude my presentation with these claims. The polar question particles, ki and naki, they can be lexically realized. They are actually the lexical realizations of the disjunction operator, both in yes/no question as well as in alternative question. And the key, the interrogative disjunction key, has a cornering effect where naki does not have, even na doesn't have. And the embedded clause structure, where ki and na, they actually occur separately with a pause in between. It has an interpretation of alternative question. It does not have an interpretation of polar question with an open-ended possible answers, because usually in polar questions, we always have open-ended possible answers, but not in alternative questions. And that is the exact interpretation we get with ki separated from na. Also, in an embedded alternative question structure, when we see the key in the subject to position, that is not the moved key of the kina, that is the PQP key which is originated there. And we have also tried to go through some evidence on that based on its occurrence with naki. And another claim that I have made here, that the interrogative disjunction marker na is the contracted form of the interrogative disjunction morpheme naki. And so when ki and na, they are joined together like kina, in those structures we get an embedded polar question interpretation. But whenever they are separated, we get an embedded alternative question interpretation, and not only that, we get a cornering effect. So based on that, again, I would say that maybe this claim would be too quick to make. I need to get through more research. Maybe Bangla, like Hindi, has a null weather operator. The weather operator which has been claimed as Kina, that is not the weather in Bangla. Kina is simply the or not concatenation. Okay, and that is it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hi, Ambalika. Great presentation. I wanted to ask regarding this three-way identification that Jaishalan makes between question operator and distinction. So in Marathi, we have this polar question particle ka that can also figure in alternative questions as well. Now, the funny thing with ka is that it can also do plain disjunction in declarative. So I can say, Anu chaha ka coffee ghete, Anu will take tea ka coffee, and here I get an epistemic reading which reflects the speaker's ignorance. Now, if this ka is the same as the polar question particle and the one that occurs in alternative questions, then I don't understand how the plus q, something that has a plus q feature can figure in declaratives at all, which is what is happening in Marathi. Plus, this modal aspect of disjunction with ka is only restricted to ka. The Boolean disjunction kimma, it cannot have this epistemic reading at all. So we have this nice two-way need distinction as well.
So are you saying that you have this particle which occurs in yes-no question, it also occurs as a Boolean disjunction marker, and it also occurs as alternative question disjunction particle, right?
Yeah.
Right. Shaunak, I'm not very sure. I think Amrit has worked on it in the language Kannada. Can you please check her paper? I'll just tell you the year number. I think I've just mentioned it in my presentation. Yes, I think it's the 2003 paper of... Okay. Probably she actually started explaining this with either and or explanation. Right. I'm not very clear about this understanding, okay? But the data that you're presenting to me, I think I have also noticed the same kind of behavior that she shows there, and she starts her explanation with either and or.
Right. No, but the ka particle does not have an either or reading. That is relegated to kimma, which is the Boolean distinction. The only kind of distinction that I get with ka is one where it reflects speaker's ignorance. And this reading actually improves if I have some sort of repetitive evidential and that embeds this distinction as well. So something like Anu said she will have tea, ka coffee. It means that I don't know what she is going to have, but it's tea or coffee.
Oh, so you're saying you have repetitive evidential reading?
Yeah. I mean the ignorance reading improves if I have some sort of like repetitive evidential marker or a verb or something like that. Like if I say that Anu said she'll have tea, ka, coffee, then that means I'm not sure which one it is. But if I use kimma, which is the Boolean disjunction, then it's like she's going to have either of the two. She has no preference. So only ka can have this ignorance effect, but kimma cannot.
Oh, that is very, very intriguing. Can it also have an inferential evidence, like because you're talking about the epistemic reading, so I was just wondering. You have repetitive, but also inferential.
I have not checked with inferential, but with repetitive, the reading strengthens much more than just without a repetitive embedding.
Yeah, I really don't know, Shaunak, why does it happen? I just I have to say.
So do you have this sort of distinction in Bangla?
Or no, because what you're saying, ki or because naki. No, it's not, because the Boolean disjunction marker is ba. That is it. Like naki or ki or na, they cannot occur as Boolean disjunction marker.